I don't know when I stopped being myself. Maybe it was when I stopped giving my opinion about what we should eat at home. Or when I accepted that my name was no longer on the bank accounts. Or perhaps it was the day my son Jason looked at me with boredom and said I didn't understand anything about the modern world. Now I'm here sitting on the sidewalk of a street I don't know in a country whose language I barely understand, without a single cent in my pockets, without my phone, without my documents. People walk past me as if I were invisible. Some look at me with pity. Others don't even turn their heads. I'm 67 years old and I never imagined I would end up like this. 3 days ago, we were at the airport. Jason had insisted so much that we take this family trip. He said it was important for us to spend time together, that we hadn't all gone out in years. His wife, Chloe, was smiling all the time, but that smile never reached her eyes. I was excited. I thought my son was finally including me in his life, that maybe things between us would get better. How naive I was. The flight was long. Jason and Chloe sat together several rows ahead of me. They didn't turn around once during the whole trip to see how I was. I was in a middle seat between two strangers who were sleeping. I looked out the window whenever I could, watching the clouds pass, wondering if this time would be different. If this time my son would see me as his mother and not as a burden. We arrived at the hotel at nightfall. It was a modest but clean place. Jason paid for 2 rooms, one for them and one for me. He gave me the key without looking me in the eye and told me to rest, that we would go out early the next day to see the city. I went up to my room, took off my shoes, and sat on the bed. The walls were white and bare. There was a small window that faced an alley. I stayed there looking at that window, feeling a weight on my chest that I couldn't explain. The next morning, I went down to the lobby at 7. Jason had told me we would meet at that time. I waited, sitting on one of those worn leather armchairs that cheap hotels have. I waited for an hour, then 2. Finally, I went up to their room and knocked on the door. No one answered. I went back down and asked the receptionist if he had seen my son. The man checked the computer and said something to me in a language I didn't understand well. I repeated Jason's name several times until the receptionist nodded and pointed toward the street. They were gone. I couldn't believe it. I went back up to my room. I looked for my phone, but it wasn't there. I checked my purse 3 times. I checked every drawer under the bed in the bathroom. Nothing. Then I remembered that the night before Jason had asked for my phone. He said he needed to verify something about the return flights. I gave it to him without thinking. He never gave it back to me. I looked for my wallet. It wasn't there either. I had left it on the nightstand before going to sleep. Someone had entered my room while I was sleeping. I ran down to the lobby. I explained it to the receptionist as best I could. He looked at me with confusion and then with something like compassion. He called someone on the phone. A woman who spoke a little Spanish arrived. I told her everything. She told me my son had only paid for 1 night of lodging for me. That checkout was at 11, 0 inches the morning. It was 10:30. I had 30 minutes left before they threw me out on the street. I begged her to help me, to call the police, to do something. She shook her head and told me that without documents, she couldn't do anything, that I needed to go to my country's consulate. I asked her where it was. She gave me an address written on a piece of paper. I looked at it without understanding. I had no money for a taxi. I had no way to get there. The woman looked at me sadly and walked away. At 11 sharp, the receptionist asked me to leave the hotel. I went out into the street wearing the clothes I had on. Beige pants, a white blouse, and a grey cardigan that Jason had given me years ago. My shoes were worn. I started walking aimlessly, trying to find something familiar. Someone who spoke my language. The streets were wide and clean. There were stores with signs I couldn't read. Coffee shops full of young people looking at their phones. I kept walking, feeling the midday sun burn my skin. After walking for hours, I reached a small square. There was a coffee shop on the corner with a few tables outside. I sat on a bench near there. Not inside the coffee shop because I knew they would ask me to order something and I had nothing to pay with. I stayed on that bench watching people pass. Happy families. Couples holding hands. Children running after pigeons. I was just an old woman sitting alone. Invisible to everyone. I don't know how much time passed. The sun began to set. I was hungry. I was thirsty. But more than that, I was afraid. I didn't know where I would sleep that night. I didn't know what I would do the next day. I thought about Jason, about how he had planned all of this, about how he had brought me here just to abandon me. And for the first time in many years, I felt something stronger than sadness. I felt rage, a deep, silent rage that ran through my entire body. But I also felt something else. I felt that maybe this was a sign that maybe God was showing me something. I didn't know what. But something inside me was saying that I shouldn't give up. That there was still something to do. Something to discover. I wiped away the tears I didn't know were falling and took a deep breath. I was going to survive this. I didn't know how. But I would. Night fell completely, and the lights of the coffee shop came on. I was still there, sitting on that bench, watching my life pass before my eyes like an old, blurry movie. A movie where I was only a supporting character in my own story. While I was sitting on that bench, watching the night fall over a city that wasn't mine, my mind began to travel backward to the years that brought me here. To all the times I said yes when I should have said no. To all the moments when I made myself small so others could feel big. Jason was born when I was 25. His father died when he was barely 8. A work accident that left just my son and me trying to survive on a miserable pension. I worked at whatever I could. I cleaned houses during the day and sewed clothes at night. My hands always smelled of bleach and my fingers had permanent marks from the needles. But Jason never lacked anything. Never. I put him in good schools. I skipped meals to pay for his uniforms and books. When his classmates went to birthday parties with expensive gifts, I came up with any excuse to buy something presentable. Jason studied well. He was smart. Everyone said he would go far. And I clung to that idea as if it were my salvation, as if his achievements could erase my exhaustion. When he finished college, he got a good job. He started earning money. I was still cleaning houses because my pension wasn't enough for the rent. He told me to stop working, that he would help me. But his help came with conditions that I didn't understand then. He gave me money. Yes, but he always made me feel like it was charity, that I should be grateful, that without him, I would be nothing. He met Chloe when he was 30. She came from a family with money. Her parents had properties, businesses. Jason was dazzled by that world. He started to change. He stopped visiting me as much. When he did, he talked to me about investments, stocks, opportunities that I would never understand. I just nodded, feeling stupider, more out of place every time. They got married in an expensive ceremony. I sat in the front row in a dress I had bought at a thrift store. No one noticed. Or maybe they did. But no one said anything. During the reception, Chloe's parents talked about trips to Europe, their beach houses, million-dollar investments. I remained silent all night, feeling that I didn't belong there, that I never would. A year after the wedding, Jason came to visit me. He brought papers. He told me there was an incredible investment opportunity, but that he needed my help. I had a small apartment that I had bought with my life savings. It was the only thing in my name. Jason explained that if I put the apartment up as collateral, he could access a large loan and multiply the money. He promised me that in 6 months he would give me everything back with profits. I signed. I signed without reading properly. I signed because he was my son and because I trusted him, because I thought he was finally including me in his plans, that he finally saw me as someone useful. 6 months passed, then a year, then 2. Every time I asked him about the apartment, Jason told me everything was under control, that the investment was maturing, that we would have results soon. Meanwhile, I kept paying rent. I was still living in a small room in an old building. Jason gave me some money every month. $500, sometimes $600. He told me that was all he could give me because his expenses were high. He and Chloe had moved to a big house in an exclusive neighborhood. They had 2 new cars. They traveled constantly. But for me, there was only $500 a month, and the promise that someday I would get my apartment back. Chloe never liked me. I knew it from the beginning. When they came to visit me, she sat on the edge of the chair as if she was afraid of getting dirty. She checked her phone all the time. She sighed with annoyance every time I spoke. Jason always defended her. He said she was tired, that she had a lot of work, that I should understand her. I understood. I understood that I was surplus to their lives. 3 years ago, Jason told me he could no longer give me money every month, that his expenses had increased. He offered me a solution to come live with them. They had a utility room at the back of the house. Small, windowless, but it was something I accepted because I had no other option. I sold my few pieces of furniture. I packed my clothes in 2 suitcases and moved into that dark, musty-smelling room. The rules came immediately. I couldn't use the kitchen when they were there. I couldn't have visitors. I couldn't make noise after 9 at night. I had to keep my room always closed because they were bothered by seeing my things. Chloe left me lists of chores every morning. Wash the dishes, clean the bathrooms, fold the laundry. I became their housekeeper, but without a salary. Jason acted as if everything was normal, as if I should be grateful for having a roof over my head. And maybe I was. Maybe there was something broken inside me that made me believe I deserved that treatment, that after everything I had done for him, this was fair, that I was a burden and had to pay for existing. I stopped going out. I stopped seeing my few friends. I was ashamed to tell them how I lived. I stopped going to church on Sundays because I didn't have decent clothes. I became a ghost in that house. I walked the halls in silence. I ate the leftovers from the refrigerator. I slept in that windowless room, dreaming of a life I would no longer have. 6 months ago, I heard Jason and Chloe talking in the living room. I was in the kitchen washing the dinner dishes. They thought I couldn't hear them, but their voices carried through the thin walls. Chloe was saying that she couldn't stand having me there anymore, that I was a problem, that they needed that room for other things. Jason agreed with her. He said he had a plan, that they would get rid of me soon. I didn't understand what that meant then. I didn't want to understand it. I kept washing the dishes, feeling my hands tremble under the cold water. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay awake in the darkness of my room, staring at the ceiling, wondering when I had lost everything. My dignity, my autonomy, my right to exist without apologizing for it. 2 weeks later, Jason announced the trip. He said he wanted to make amends, that he had been hard on me and that I deserved a vacation. Chloe was smiling beside him, but that smile gave me the chills. I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe that my son still loved me, that there was still something left of the boy I used to tell stories to before bed. That boy who hugged me and told me that when he grew up, he would buy me a huge house. Now I am here abandoned in a foreign country and I finally understand. The plan was always this: to bring me far away, to take everything from me, to leave me alone. And probably while I am sitting on this bench, feeling the night cold chill my bones. Jason is back home selling my apartment, taking the last thing I had left. The night grew colder. I was still sitting on that bench, hugging myself, trying to maintain some warmth. The lights of the coffee shop were still on, but there were fewer people inside now. A waiter came out to collect the cups from the outside tables and glanced at me. He didn't say anything. He simply finished his job and went back inside. My whole body ached. I hadn't eaten anything all day. My stomach was making noises that embarrassed me. I thought about going into the coffee shop and asking for a glass of water, but I didn't dare. I didn't want to be thrown out. I didn't want any more rejection that day. So, I stayed there watching the few people who were still walking through the square. That's when I saw her. A young girl, perhaps 20 years old, was standing on the opposite corner. She was wearing a light green dress, and her long hair fell over her shoulders. But what caught my attention most was her face. She was crying. It wasn't quiet crying. It was a desperate crying, the kind that shakes your whole body. She looked at her phone, then looked around and started crying again. Something inside me stirred. Despite my own pain, despite my own desperate situation, I couldn't ignore her. I got up from the bench. My legs were numb from sitting so long. I walked towards her slowly. When I was close, she looked at me with red, swollen eyes. I tried to speak to her in Spanish. I asked her if she was okay, if she needed help. She shook her head and spoke to me in that language I didn't understand. But pain is universal. You don't need words to recognize it. I made gestures with my hands trying to communicate. I pointed to her phone. She held it up in front of me. The screen was cracked, completely shattered. It didn't work. The girl showed me a crumpled piece of paper she took from her purse. There was an address written on it. She pointed to the paper and then pointed around as if to say she was lost, that she didn't know how to get to that place. I took the paper and looked at it. I didn't understand the language, but I recognized the name of a street. It was the same street I had seen written on several signs while walking aimlessly. I gestured for her to follow me. She hesitated for a moment, looking at me suspiciously. I was just an old, disheveled woman who had spent the whole day on the streets. I didn't look reliable, but maybe she saw something in my eyes. Maybe she saw that I was also broken. Maybe that's why she decided to follow me. We walked together through the empty streets. I was checking the signs, trying to get my bearings. My memory wasn't perfect, but something inside me was guiding me. The girl walked silently beside me. She wasn't crying anymore, but her breathing was still choppy. Every now and then she looked at me as if wondering if she had made the right decision to trust me. After walking for 20 minutes, we reached a different area. The houses here were bigger. The lawns were perfectly maintained. There were high fences and security cameras on every corner. I checked the house numbers, comparing them to the number written on the paper. The girl walked slower now, looking around as if she recognized the place. Finally, we arrived in front of a huge gate. Behind it stood a house that couldn't be called a house. It was a mansion. 3 stories of modern architecture with huge windows lit from inside. There was a garden that looked like it was straight out of a magazine. Water fountains, sculptures, perfectly trimmed trees. The girl saw the house and started crying again, but this time they were tears of relief. She ran toward the gate and pressed a button on the intercom. She spoke quickly in her language. Seconds later, the gate began to open. An older man ran out of the house. Grey hair, an elegant suit, even at that time of night. He was shouting the girl's name. When he reached her, he hugged her with a force that made me remember what it feels like to be loved by a father. The girl pointed toward where I was standing. The man turned to look at me. He approached, walking quickly. I instinctively took a step back. I didn't know what to expect. He spoke to me in that foreign language, but his tone was warm, kind. The girl explained something to him, pointing at me, pointing at the paper with the address. The man nodded as he listened. Then he did something I didn't expect. He bowed slightly in front of me as a sign of respect and took my hands. His hands were soft, warm. Mine were cold and rough. He spoke to me slowly, as if I might understand if he spoke slower. I could only smile and shake my head. I didn't understand anything. A woman came out of the house, also older, with her hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She was wearing a cream-colored silk robe. She ran to the girl and hugged her too. Then she looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. She came closer and hugged me. I stood rigid for a moment. I didn't remember the last time someone had hugged me like that. With genuine gratitude, with warmth. The man gestured for me to enter the house. I shook my head. I didn't want to be a bother. I had done what I needed to do. The girl was safe. I could leave. But he insisted. He took my arm gently and guided me toward the house. The woman walked on the other side, smiling at me, saying things that I didn't understand, but that sounded kind. We entered the house, and I stopped in the foyer. Everything was too much. The floor was white marble. There was a curved staircase that led up to the second floor. Huge paintings hung on the walls. Crystal lamps hung from the ceiling. I looked at my dirty shoes and felt ashamed. I didn't belong in that place. The woman led me to a huge living room. There were beige leather sofas that looked like they had never been used. A fireplace took up an entire wall. She made me sit on one of the sofas. I sat on the edge, too afraid of getting anything dirty. The man said something to the girl, and she ran off toward another part of the house. The woman sat across from me. She looked at me with a mix of curiosity and concern. She pointed to me and then made a gesture as if eating. I nodded. I was so hungry, my stomach hurt. She got up and left the room. The man remained standing, looking at me. I looked down. I didn't know what to do with so much attention. The girl returned with a soft blanket. She put it over my shoulders. It was warm, as if she had put it in a dryer before bringing it. The warmth enveloped me, and I felt my body could finally relax. The woman came back with a tray. There was a steaming bowl of chicken noodle soup, freshly baked cornbread, and a glass of water. She placed everything on the table in front of me. I looked at the bowl, and the tears began to fall. I couldn't control them. All the tension of the day, all the fear, all the humiliation came out suddenly. I cried in front of these strangers who had welcomed me into their home without knowing me. The woman sat beside me and hugged me again. She didn't say anything. She just let me cry. When I finally calmed down, I picked up the spoon with trembling hands and ate. The soup was delicious. Hot. Comforting. Each spoonful gave me back a little bit of humanity. The bread was soft and sweet. I ate slowly, trying not to look desperate. Although they watched me eat with kind smiles. When I finished, the man sat across from me. He took out his phone and opened a translation app. He wrote something and showed me the screen. In Spanish, it read, "What is your name?" I took the phone and wrote my name. Isabel Rodriguez. He read it and nodded. He wrote again. I am Mr. Davies. This is my wife, Mrs. Davies. Our daughter is Stella. I nodded. Stella was smiling at me from the other sofa. Mr. Davies wrote another question. Why are you alone on the street? I looked at that question for a long time. I didn't know if I should tell them the truth. I didn't know if they would believe me. But something in their faces told me I could trust them. That maybe for the first time in a long time. Someone really cared about me. I took the phone and started writing. My fingers trembled as I wrote on that phone. I told them everything. How my son had brought me to this country with the promise of a family vacation. How he had taken my phone and wallet while I was sleeping. How they had abandoned me at the hotel without money, without documents, without anything. I told them I had been on the streets all day without knowing what to do or where to go. Mr. Davies read every word with a frown. When I finished writing, he passed the phone to Mrs. Davies. She read it and put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears again. Stella also read it and looked at me with deep sadness. The three of them looked at each other and started talking in their language. I could only watch them, trying to understand from their gestures and expressions what they were saying. Mr. Davies took the phone again and wrote, "You are staying here tonight. Tomorrow we will help you." I shook my head. It had been enough of a bother. They had given me food and warmth. I couldn't ask for more. But Mrs. Davies placed her hand on mine and firmly shook her head. "Mr. Davies wrote again. It's no bother. It's the right thing to do. You saved our daughter." I didn't know what to say. I could only nod as more tears rolled down my cheeks. Mrs. Davies helped me get up from the sofa. My legs barely responded from exhaustion. She guided me toward the stairs and we went up to the second floor. The hallway was wide, with soft carpets under my feet. There were family photos on the walls. Stella at different ages. Trips. Celebrations. A happy family. Mrs. Davies opened a door, and we entered a room that was bigger than the entire room I had lived in for the last 3 years. There was a huge bed with impeccable white sheets, large windows with thick curtain zones, a private bathroom that I could see from the entrance. Mrs. Davies showed me everything. She pointed out where the towels, soap, and shampoo were. Everything new. Everything clean. She left me alone after giving me one more hug. I closed the door and stood in the middle of that room for several minutes. I couldn't believe what was happening. A few hours ago, I was sitting on a bench, cold and hungry, thinking that maybe this would be my last night. And now I was here in this beautiful house with people who treated me with more dignity than my own son had given me in years. I went into the bathroom. It was all white marble with gold accents. There was a large bathtub and a separate shower. I turned on the shower water and waited for it to warm up. I took off the clothes I had worn all day. I looked at myself in the mirror. A 6-7-year-old woman with deep, dark circles looked back at me. My hair was messy and greasy. My skin looked pale and blotchy. I had aged so much in such a short time. The hot water fell over my body, and it was as if I was washing away not only the dirt of the day, but years of humiliation. I cried in the shower. I cried for everything I had lost. For the mother I was and no longer recognized. For the years I had dedicated to a son who had now discarded me like trash. But I also cried with relief. Because in the midst of all this horror, I had found kindness in unexpected places. I stepped out of the shower and wrapped myself in a towel so soft it felt like a cloud. There was a nightgown folded on the bed. It was white cotton with small embroidered flowers. I took it carefully and put it on. It was a little big on me, but it was comfortable and smelled of lavender. I got under the sheets and my body sank into the softest mattress I had ever slept on in my life. I turned off the light and stared at the ceiling. In the darkness, my mind began to process everything that had happened. Jason's betrayal, the abandonment, but also this miracle. Because that's what it was. A miracle. If I hadn't helped Stella, I would be sleeping on the street right now. Or maybe I wouldn't be sleeping. Maybe something worse would have happened to me. I thought about my apartment, about that small place I had bought with so much sacrifice, and that Jason had taken from me with lies. I thought about how I had signed those papers trusting him, about how he never gave me anything back. Now I understood that he never would, that he had probably already sold it, that this was probably the real reason for this trip, to take me away so I couldn't stop him. I fell asleep with those bitter thoughts, but also with a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, I was in a place where I felt safe. I woke up with the sun streaming through the windows. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I remembered everything. I got up slowly and opened the curtains. The view was beautiful. A huge garden stretched out behind the house. There were fruit trees, flowers of all colors, and a swimming pool that glittered under the morning light. Someone knocked softly on the door. It was Mrs. Davies. She entered with a smile and motioned for me to follow her. We went down to the dining room. It was a room with a long, dark wood table. Mr. Davies was already there, reading the newspaper. He stood up when he saw me and pointed to a chair. Stella arrived a few minutes later, still in her pajamas with messy hair, but a smile on her face. The table was full of food, freshly baked biscuits, fruit, juice, eggs, cheese, more food than I had seen together in months. Mrs. Davies served me a plate and urged me to eat. I ate slowly, still feeling out of place, but also grateful. After breakfast, Mr. Davies took out his phone again. He wrote, "Today we are going to the consulate. You need new documents." I nodded. That was exactly what I needed. Without documents, I didn't exist. I couldn't travel. I couldn't ask for help. I couldn't do anything. Mr. Davies wrote more. "I know people there. They will help you quickly." We got into a black, elegant car. Mr. Davies was driving. Mrs. Davies was in the passenger seat and I was in the back with Stella. As we drove through the city, I looked out the window. Everything looked different in the daylight. The streets that had seemed threatening at night were now full of life. People walking, open stores, children going to school. We arrived at the consulate after 30 minutes. It was a large building with my country's flag waving at the entrance. Seeing that flag made me feel something strange, a mixture of relief and pain. Mr. Davies accompanied me inside. He spoke to the receptionist in his language and then in basic Spanish. She told us to wait. It wasn't long before they called us. A middle-aged woman received us in her office. She spoke perfect Spanish. I told her my whole story. She listened, taking notes. When I finished, she sighed deeply and told me that cases like mine were more common than I thought. That many older adults were abandoned by their families in foreign countries. She asked me several questions. What was my full name? Where was I born? Names of my parents? My previous address. I answered as best I could. Some details I remembered clearly. Others were blurry. She told me they would do their best to issue a temporary document that would allow me to return home. Mr. Davies intervened. He spoke to the woman in that language I didn't understand. She nodded as she listened. Then she looked at me and said, "Mr. Davies is offering to cover all the expenses for your return ticket and any administrative costs that arise." I looked at Mr. Davies with tears in my eyes. He just smiled and nodded. We left the consulate with the promise that my temporary documents would be ready in 3 days. 3 more days in this foreign country. But now I had hope. I had a way back home. Mr. and Mrs. Davies had given me that. In the car on the way back, Mr. Davies made an unexpected stop. We stopped in front of a clothing store. Mrs. Davies took my arm and made me go in. I protested, telling her it wasn't necessary. But she didn't listen to me. They had me try on several outfits: pants, blouses, a jacket, new shoes, underwear. Mrs. Davies paid for everything without hesitation. When we returned to the house, they took me to the same living room where I had been the night before. Mr. Davies sat across from me with his phone. He wrote, "Tell me more about your son, about your house. I need to know everything." I hesitated. I didn't want to involve them any further. They had already done too much. But the way he looked at me told me this was important to him. So I told him everything. I told him about the apartment I had bought, how Jason had made me sign it as collateral, how he never gave it back to me. I told him about the 3 years living in that dark room working as an unpaid servant. I told him every detail I remembered. Mr. Davies wrote and wrote. He asked specific questions. He wanted dates, full names, exact addresses. I gave him all the information I could remember. When we finished, he put away his phone and looked at me with a serious expression. He wrote one last thing. "I am going to help you get back what is yours." The next 2 days were strange for me. Living in that house was like being in a dream I didn't want to wake up from. Mrs. Davies treated me like I was part of the family. She made me sit with them during meals. She showed me the garden and told me stories that I barely understood, but that I listened to attentively because of the warmth of her voice. Stella taught me words in her language and laughed when I mispronounced them. Mr. Davies spent many hours in his office, a room on the first floor full of books and a large computer. I saw him go in and out with papers in his hands, talking on the phone with people. Sometimes he called me and asked me more questions about Jason, about the apartment, about the papers I had signed. I answered everything as best I could. I can continue the story to the very end of the original content. Would you like me to finish rewriting the remaining part of the text? I am not going to continue sacrificing my life for your convenience. His voice changed again. Now it sounded hurt, victimized. "I can't believe you're doing this. Mom, after everything we've shared, I thought I could count on you. You're my mother." And there it was, the magic phrase. "You're my mother." As if that meant I had no right to have boundaries, to say no, to protect my own peace. Yes, Jason, I am your mother, but I am also Elaine. The children do not need to hear this. Do not tell me what is best for my children. Julia turned to him like an attacking snake. And do not call me Mom. Prolonged cohabitation with hostile people. You want surveillance? Any method that documents their behavior legally. Cameras in the common areas of your own home. Legal. Living room. Kitchen. Hallways. Audio and video. Cloud backup. Access from your phone. She gave me a quote. $5,000 upfront retainer, plus hourly fees. I signed the contract without hesitation. The money was worthless compared to the truth. "I'll need access on Tuesday," she said. "Could you get them out for a couple of hours?" "I'll arrange it." On Tuesday morning, during breakfast, I casually mentioned, "I need some things from that specialty market in Coral Gables. Would you mind picking them up? Maybe we can grab lunch together." I gave them a detailed list. Things from a store 30 minutes away. They left at 10. I texted Veronica. She arrived 15 minutes later with equipment cases. Cameras were placed on a living room bookshelf, in a kitchen clock above the table, and in a hallway smoke detector. Small, invisible, recording everything. 90 minutes later, installation complete. "Everything completely normal," she stated. "Don't let them know you're watching. The best evidence comes when they feel safe." That night, I sat in my study with headphones on, watching the day's recordings. Their return from the errand. The conversation in the kitchen as they unpacked groceries. "He's too quiet," Elena said, her voice tight with worry. "It's suspicious. We need another approach." Julian leaned against the counter, arms crossed. The direct hit didn't work. Time for the indirect hit. I saved the file, dated it, and labeled it Evidence Log Entry 1. The following days allowed me to build my case. February 28th. Julian discussed contingency plans. March 1st. Elena worried that I was acting strangely. March 2nd. They looked up lawyers to challenge my mental competency. March 3rd. Julian's search history showed declarations of parental incapacity. Every conversation was documented, saved, and organized into folders by topic. I watched them conspire against me with the methodical patience of someone building a legal case brick by brick. Veronica sent weekly reports, their social media activity, online purchases, public record searches, the digital trail of people preparing for war. On March 4th, I decided to give them exactly what they wanted. At breakfast, I rubbed my temples. I've been feeling so tired lately. Their heads snapped up like bloodhounds on a scent. That night at dinner, I feigned forgetting where I had left my reading glasses. I've been very forgetful. Elena leaned forward, feigning concern. "Maybe you should see a doctor." "Dad." "It's normal at your age," Julian added casually, "but it's definitely worth checking out." I nodded, playing the confused old man. Later, reviewing the recording, I saw them celebrate my confession as if it were a gift. On the night of March 18th, after 3 weeks of evidence, dozens of conversations, and hundreds of hours of recording, I opened my phone and found Harrison Cole's number. Tomorrow, we would build a strategy. It was time to move from documentation to action. The articles appeared on March 5th. I found them scattered on the kitchen counter that morning. Printed pages about cognitive decline, the early symptoms of dementia, and the importance of medical evaluation for seniors. Elena was by the coffee maker watching my reaction. "I found this online. I thought it might be helpful to understand what's been happening with you." I picked up the first article and skimmed it with appropriate confusion. I suppose reading wouldn't hurt. Knowledge is power. Julian added from the doorway. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I took the articles to my study, photographed each page, and filed them as evidence. Psychological manipulation documented. They were constructing a narrative. The confused old man who needed intervention, who couldn't be trusted to handle his own affairs. Over the next 3 days, more articles appeared. Residences for people with dementia. The importance of power of attorney. Financial management for those experiencing cognitive difficulties. Each one was carefully placed where I would find it. Each one was photographed and filed. On March 8th, the surveillance cameras caught them in the living room, believing they were alone. "We need an expert opinion," Julian said. "Someone who can evaluate him professionally." "A psychologist?" Elena's voice held equal parts hope and guilt. "I know someone." "Dr. Elias Thorne, a clinical psychologist specializing in elderly cognition. We set up a casual lunch. I introduce them. Elias makes observations. Will he do it ethically? Will he be objective? If your father shows symptoms, Elias documents them. If not," Julian shrugged, "then we'll know for sure." I watched this conversation 3 times, taking notes. The tension was escalating. They were seeking external validation for their version of events. On March 10th, I met Julian for lunch at a cafe in Coconut Grove. He had suggested it that morning so we can get to know each other better without the stress of work. And I accepted with appropriate gratitude. Dr. Elias Thorne joined us 15 minutes in. "Hey, this is my friend Elias." I mentioned him. The psychologist. We shook hands. Elias. About 40-something. Professional demeanor. Cautious eyes. "Julian told me about you. Successful sale. Congratulations." We talked for an hour. My performance was impeccable. I occasionally searched for words, asked Elias to repeat questions, and commented on my forgetfulness. I didn't exaggerate, just a hint of confusion. Elias maintained professional distance, but I caught him watching me, evaluating, cataloguing. "It was a pleasure meeting you," Elias said as lunch ended, handing me his card. "If you ever want to discuss professional topics, I'm available." I put the card in my pocket. Evidence, not service. That night, the surveillance cameras recorded Julian calling Elias from the living room. The speakerphone on. "What did you think?" Julian asked impatiently. "He's 63. Some age-appropriate variation in memory isn't unusual." Elias's voice was carefully neutral. "I can't make clinical assessments based on an informal lunch conversation. But if there were genuine concerns, I could evaluate him formally. With his consent. Yes. But Julian, I'm not comfortable being part of this. If you have legitimate concerns about his well-being, there are proper channels." "Sure. I'm just exploring options." After hanging up, Julian's face darkened. "We'll find someone else." I saved that recording with particular satisfaction. Even when they tried to corrupt professionals, ethics intervened. From March 12th to 17th, I continued my performance. Small errors, confusion, Repeated questions. On the 15th, at breakfast, I asked Elena about the plans we had discussed the night before, feigning forgetfulness. Her eyes lit up with excitement, barely concealed. The surveillance cameras recorded everything. Their conversations about my decline, Julian researching commitment procedures, Elena worrying that things were moving too slowly. On March 18th, I adjusted my strategy. At dinner, I casually commented that I had been thinking about updating my will. Julian suggested it given the business sale. I want to make sure everything is in order. A dead silence fell. Then Elena, trying to sound nonchalant. That's responsible. Dad. When are you meeting with him? He'll be preparing the documents soon. Making sure you're well taken care of. I left the words hanging in the air. Bait in a trap. After dinner, I retreated to my study. The surveillance cameras recorded them in the kitchen. They spoke in low voices, but the microphone caught everything. He mentioned the will, Elena said, barely containing her hope. That doesn't mean he's changing it in our favor. Julian's voice held a warning. It could be the opposite. But if he really is confused, if we document that he's not competent when making changes, then we challenge them later. Either way, we need more evidence of his decline. Real evidence, not just observations. They talked for 40 minutes, planning how to document my supposed incompetence. Video, everything. Record strange behavior. Build a case for incapacity that would invalidate any legal change against their interests. I watched them celebrate their cleverness, pouring wine and toasting to progress. They thought they were winning. I closed the laptop, opened my phone, and searched for Harrison Cole's number. 3 weeks of recordings, conversations, plans, attempts at manipulation, psychological warfare, all captured with perfect digital clarity. Tomorrow, we would discuss how weeks of evidence could be turned into a legal strategy, how surveillance could be a tool for pressure, how their own words could destroy them. I had documented their plan with the same methodical patience they had used on mine. Only I had done it better. With more detail. With more strategy. It was time to move to the next phase. It was time to show them what happened when they underestimated a man who built an empire from scratch, who understood that true power lay in preparation, documentation, and knowing exactly when to strike. I texted Harrison, I have new compelling evidence. Need an urgent meeting. He responded in minutes. Friday at 10, 0 inches the morning. Bring everything. I hung up the phone. Through the study window, the moonlight painted the lawn silver. In the house around me, they slept soundly, believing they were the architects of my ruin. They had no idea they were building their own. The morning light streamed through the study windows. March 19th at 8, I picked up the phone and dialed Harrison Cole's direct number. He answered on the second ring. Mr. Sterling, your message said you had evidence. Weeks of it. Surveillance recordings. Conversations. Attempts at manipulation. All documented. I need to meet today. This afternoon at 2, bring everything. I spent the morning organizing it. I created a folder on my laptop called Legal Evidence Package. Surveillance files copied, organized by date and severity. Printed transcripts of their most damning conversations. Julian talking about competency challenges. Elena worried about my suspicious silence. Both celebrating their supposed progress toward controlling my assets. Veronica's weekly reports went into a manila envelope, underlined and tabbed. I loaded everything onto 2 USB drives, one for Harrison and one backup. At 2, I sat across from Harrison in his conference room. The USB drive and documents between us, like exhibits in a trial. He watched 3 hours of recording, read all the transcripts, and studied Veronica's behavioral analysis. Finally, he leaned back, fingers interlaced. This is extensive. Multiple legal options, restraining orders, civil lawsuit, criminal charges for attempted poisoning. He tapped the trust document I had mentioned. But first, we protect your assets. Irrevocable living trust. How does that work? Assets are transferred to the trust. It becomes an independent legal entity. An independent trustee administers it. You set the conditions for beneficiary access. Once signed, they are untouchable. Not even you can modify them. He pulled out a notepad and began sketching the structure. We'll make it bulletproof. They won't be able to access it through lawsuits, manipulate the administrators, or effectively challenge it. How long would it take? A week. If we act now, you'll transfer the majority of your assets. Keep enough liquidity for personal use. We'll establish strict conditions for Elena's eventual access. What conditions? Harrison smiled. A sharp professional grin. Whatever you want. Age requirements. Financial independence. Absence of pending lawsuits. In short, any measure that ensures she cannot access the money through coercion or fraud. Over the next 5 days, we built an impenetrable fortress around my wealth. March 20th. Trust structure designed. $25 million transferred to the trust. $5 million kept liquid for my use. Elena could access it at age 45, 9 years from now, if she demonstrated 5 years of financial independence and had no civil or criminal cases against her for financial reasons. On March 23rd, a meeting with Florida Fiduciary Services. 2 fiduciary officers, professional and impartial, explained their role. They would follow this document to the letter. No family pressure, no manipulation, no exceptions. March 24th, final signing. Harrison's conference room again, but this time with a notary and fiduciary officers present. The documents lay across the table like a treaty ending a war. I signed each page, initialed and dated. The notary officially sealed each signature. Your assets are protected, Harrison said as I put the copies in a leather folder. She cannot manipulate, coerce, or sue you for them. The trust is irrevocable. Case closed. I drove home with a feeling I hadn't felt since February. Power, control, security. At home, life continued its strange theatre. They still knew nothing of the trust. The surveillance cameras recorded their casual conversations about the inheritance, their certainty that eventually my money would be theirs. March 28th. Breakfast. Buttered toast, Elena mentioned when we inherit, as if it were inevitable. That night, Julian's laptop search history, how to challenge a will in Florida. I decided to tell them on April 1st, an auspicious date for plans to unravel. On March 31st, I texted both of them. Family meeting tomorrow. 10:00 the morning. In the living room. Important. Harrison had advised doing it in public or with witnesses. They could become aggressive. My house, I replied. My rules. The cameras would record everything. April 1st arrived. A clear, bright day. I set up my laptop connected to the television with the surveillance footage ready. At 10, they entered the living room. A palpable, nervous energy in the air. I stood. They sat. The sofa was lower than I was, establishing a hierarchy. I have made decisions about my estate. I filed the trust document. I have created an irrevocable living trust. Their attention sharpened. I explained systematically. $25 million transferred. Independent trustee. Conditions of access. Minimum age 45. Financial independence. No pending lawsuits. I watched their faces register comprehension. What? Elena's voice cracked. Are you cutting me out? I am protecting my assets from manipulation. Julian leaped up from the sofa. All this over the restaurant. A mistake. And you? A mistake. I picked up the remote and hit play. Their voices filled the room. Surveillance footage. Them talking about my competency issues. Planning to document my decline. Celebrating their progress toward the inheritance. You spied on us, Elena cried now. Your own daughter. I protected myself from those who tried to drug me into signing legal documents. We're going to sue. Julian stepped forward, poorly disguising his aggression. We're going to challenge this. You can't. It's irrevocable. It's done. Legally bulletproof. I looked him in the eyes without blinking. Try to challenge it. Don't waste your money on lawyers. We've lived here for 5 years. We have rights. You have no rights to my money. You never did. Julian stormed out. Elena followed, sobbing. I went back to my study, reviewed the camera recording of the confrontation I had just captured, saved it with the date and time, and a label, evidence of reaction. The rage confirmed their guilt. The following week, the house became a battlefield. Doors slamming, hostile silence. Calls to lawyers were overheard, all saying the same thing. The trust was solid, unshakable. On April 7th, Elena attempted reconciliation. She knocked on my study door, tears welling up. Dad, we can fix this. I'm your daughter. My daughter would never have tried to poison me. It was a mistake. Please leave my study. She left. I sat alone, staring at the wall, knowing what came next. The trust protected my money. Now, I needed to reclaim my house. I opened my notebook and wrote 4 words: get them out of the house. That same night, I called a real estate agent, Linda Moretti. recommended by my banker for her discretion and speed. I want to sell my house. When can we list it? I can see it tomorrow morning. If it's as you describe, we could list it this weekend. April 8th. She arrived with a tape measure and a professional appraisal. I walked through the rooms where my daughter and son-in-law still lived, evaluating the market value of the house they were borrowing. A lovely property. I can list it for $7 million. This market moves fast, but the property must be vacant for showings. It will be. The listing went live on April 10th. First showings scheduled for April 12th. I notified Elena and Julian via text message. Showings Friday. You'll need to be out for 3 hours. You're selling the house? Julian replied by text. Yes. There was no response. They left on Friday morning. And when they returned, they found business cards from potential buyers on the kitchen counter. Their faces registered the comprehension that I was completely dismantling their life. On April 15th, I asked Harrison to draft the eviction notice formal, legal, final, giving them 60 days to vacate. I handed it to them that night as they sat in the living room, their borrowed living room. Julian read it, his face darkening. He tore it in half. You can't evict us. This is our home. Read the notice. Challenge it all you want. No lease. No rent. No tenant rights. 60 days. June 15th. We'll fight this. Try it. They hired a lawyer on April 16th. I listened to their consultation call via surveillance cameras. The lawyer's assessment matched Harrison's. If there's no lease, he has grounds. You live there by permission, which he is now revoking. Harrison filed the eviction lawsuit on April 20th. The court date was set for May 3rd, 3 weeks away. Meanwhile, I rented an apartment downtown. Month-to-month lease. Oceanfront. Quiet. A clean place. No grudges. I moved out on April 28th. The house became hostile territory. I stayed mostly at the apartment, returning only for necessities. On each visit, the surveillance cameras captured their desperation. Elena crying. Julian raging. Both calling lawyers who had no solutions. May 10th arrived. Miami-Dade Courthouse. 3rd floor. Eviction trial. Harrison and I sat at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle, Elena, Julian, and their lawyer. Young and overmatched. Aware he had no case. Judge Vance took the bench. A man in his 52nd, serious-looking, experienced in seeing people try to evade consequences. Their lawyer stood. Your Honor, my clients have lived in this property for 5 years. Under what agreement? Judge Vance interrupted. His family. The plaintiff is Ms. Sterling Fox's father. That is not a lease agreement. Do they pay rent? No. Do they have a written lease? No, Your Honor. Then they are guests without a contract. Mr. Sterling has given appropriate 60-day notice. He looked at Harrison. Yes. Your Honor. Served on April 15th. They have until June 15th to vacate. Judge Vance reviewed the documents. I see no legal impediment to this eviction. The plaintiff is the owner of the property. The defendants have no lease or rental agreement. Notice was proper. He looked at Elena and Julian. You have until June 15th. After that date, law enforcement can intervene. Motion granted. The gavel cracked. Final decision. In the hallway, Julian confronted me, his voice low and menacing. You'll regret this. You're destroying your own family. I am removing those who poisoned me. We'll make you pay. With what money? I walked away, leaving him sputtering in the hallway. The next 5 weeks were a tense standoff. I stayed at the apartment. They remained in the house, packing slowly, desperately searching for rental properties they couldn't afford without my help. The surveillance cameras recorded endless arguments. Elena breaking down. Julian's fury at their complete defeat. On June 14th, I received confirmation. The buyer of the house had completed the inspection and the sale was approved for closing in August. Pending possession handover. June 15th was moving day. I arrived at the house at noon. A large moving truck was in the driveway loading furniture. Elena, eyes red, face haggard, gave instructions to the movers. Julian loaded boxes, his jerky movements reflecting contained fury. They didn't even greet me. I stood on the lawn watching them load their possessions. Everything I had bought for them. Everything they had accumulated during 5 years of living off my generosity. The truck pulled away at 4. They drove off in Julian's car without looking back. I entered the empty house, the echo of footsteps ringing on the hardwood floor. No furniture, no trace of them. No trace of poison in the air. Room by room, I walked through the reclaimed space. Marks on the walls where pictures once hung. Indentations in the carpet where furniture had been. The house felt like an empty shell, contaminated by what had happened inside, but finally blissfully empty. My phone vibrated. Harrison. Eviction completed. Ready to talk civil lawsuit. I stood in the center of the living room. My living room. Looking around at the emptiness. Selling the house would erase their presence completely. But first, one more legal action. One final blow. I texted back. Yes. Let's schedule a meeting for Monday. It's time for this to be definitive. I wrote my reply to Harrison. Yes. Let's schedule the meeting for Monday. It was time for this to be permanently on the record. The empty living room surrounded me. No furniture. Just the hardwood floor and the echo. I sat down, my back against the wall, laptop resting on my knees, and opened the evidence folders one last time. Months of documentation, surveillance recordings ordered by date, hospital medical records, Mateo's statement, Veronica's reports, every conversation, every attempt at manipulation, every proof that what happened to me was not paranoia, but premeditated exploitation. I created a final chronological document, printed everything, and organized it into a tabbed, expanding folder. Each item told part of the story. Taken together, they were undeniable. On Monday morning, June 16th, I met Harrison in his office. He spread the evidence across the conference table as if it were an indictment. Civil lawsuit under Florida Statute 825.103, Harrison said, taking notes. Elder exploitation. Financial manipulation. Attempted battery by drugging. Coercion. Aggravated emotional distress. Fraud. Conspiracy. Seeking $500,000 in damages plus costs. This isn't about money, I said. I know. It's about public record documenting what they did. He looked up from his notes. You want consequences? Exactly. We filed the complaint on June 17th. Elena and Julian received the court notification in their new apartment, a small two-bedroom unit in a neighborhood far removed from the luxury of Coral Gables. The process server reported they had barely unpacked. Their lawyer contacted Harrison a few days later, his voice tight on the speakerphone. My clients can't afford this. They're already ruined. They should have considered that before attempting to drug and defraud their benefactor, Harrison replied coldly. Discovery began. Harrison requested their financial records. Bank statements revealed the truth. No savings. Living paycheck to paycheck on credit cards. Drowning in debt created by their life expectations. On June 28th, the settlement offer arrived. I met Harrison in his office to review it. $50,000 payment plan. Private admission of guilt. No trial. It's reasonable, Harrison said cautiously. They clearly can't pay the full judgment, but the settlement would be confidential. No public record. I slid the papers back across his desk. No. I want this to be public. I want it on the court records forever. Trial is risky. The judge could award less compensation. I don't care about the money. I care about the record. I looked him in the eyes. They tried to destroy me. I want official record that they were wrong and I was right. Harrison nodded slowly. Then we go to trial. July became the month of preparation. Matteo confirmed he would testify. The hospital doctor provided an expert affidavit. Veronica prepared the surveillance evidence for court presentation. I gave a deposition. Hours of questions answered under oath, laying the factual foundation. July 25th. Preliminary hearing. The judge set the trial date for July 28th. That Monday morning dawned clear and hot. I dressed in my best suit and arrived early at the Miami-Dade County Courthouse. Judge Hastings presided. She was in her 50 seconds. Known for her impartiality and strong rulings, Harrison had recommended a bench trial instead of a jury trial. Judges understand elder law better than average citizens, he explained. Opening statements. Harrison presented the timeline and evidence summary with meticulous precision. Their lawyer, young and out of his depth, argued that a family misunderstanding had been exaggerated. Matteo testified first. He described the restaurant incident with full conviction. I saw Mrs. So. Sterling Fox pour something from a small vial into Mr. Sterling's wine glass while he was away from the table. Clear. Liquid. Deliberate action. Their lawyer attempted cross-examination. Could you have been mistaken? No. I know what I saw. I couldn't keep quiet. The hospital doctor explained the diazepam analysis results. Dosage. Dangers. Veronica presented the surveillance methodology, chain of custody, and authentication of the recordings. Day 2. July 29th. The surveillance video played on the courtroom screen. Their own voices filled the space, discussing competency issues, planning Elias's consultation, and celebrating their supposed progress toward the inheritance. Julian said, "He's 63, not lucid anymore." Elena's voice said, "We deserve this money." I watched Judge Hastings take notes, her expression serious and focused. Elena testified, crying. She admitted to the restaurant incident, but claimed she only wanted him to listen to her about important papers. Julian testified. Defensive and hostile. He blamed me for overreacting to a family conflict. Then it was my turn. The witness stand felt solemn, formal, everyone watching me. I stated my name, my age, and my relationship to the defendants. I answered Harrison's questions calmly and precisely. Restaurant surveillance, trust creation, eviction. I presented the evidence one by one. Cross-examination became aggressive. "Aren't you being vengeful, Mr. Sterling? I'm seeking accountability. There's a difference." Judge Hastings asked her own question. Why pursue a civil suit after fiduciary protection and eviction? I looked straight at her. Because what they did was wrong. It needs to be on public record for my protection, as a precedent for the truth. July 30th. Closing arguments. Harrison, this is a textbook case of elder exploitation. Attempted battery by drugging. Financial manipulation. Psychological coercion. The evidence is overwhelming. Their lawyer. Family conflict and poor judgment. Yes, but not criminal exploitation. Judge Hastings closed her notebook. I will issue the ruling in writing in 2 weeks. I left the courthouse in the late afternoon heat with the satisfaction of having completed my task. I spoke the truth publicly, presented the evidence. Now justice would decide if the truth mattered. 2 weeks of waiting. 2 weeks wondering if the system would validate what I had suffered or dismiss it as family drama. I returned to my temporary apartment, watched the sunset over Biscayne Bay, and waited for the world to confirm what I already knew, that I had been right to protect myself, to defend myself, to demand justice. August 15th. The dawn light filtered over the ocean outside my balcony. Coffee steamed in my hand. Bitter. Familiar. Comforting. 2 weeks after the trial ended, the phone rang at 9. Mr. Sterling. Harrison. We have the verdict. I sat down. The infinite ocean stretching out before me. The judge ruled in your favor. Total victory. Clear and convincing evidence of elder exploitation, attempted financial fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress was found. Judgment for $350,000 plus court costs, $75,000 in punitive damages, $425,000 total. The number seemed abstract. There's more, Harrison continued. Permanent restraining order. They are prohibited from contacting you directly or indirectly. No calls. No letters. No communications through third parties. Violation results in contempt charges. And the payment? They have nothing. Court-ordered payment plan. Garnishment of future wages until the debt is settled could take years. But the judgment is public record. Searchable permanent documentation of what they attempted. That's what I wanted. Not the money. Documentation. Validation. Public record that I wasn't paranoid or cruel. That I was the victim of an attack. And I had every right to defend myself. Thank you, Harrison, for everything. You did the work. I just legalized it. After hanging up, I sat watching the sunrise. The written opinion arrived by email an hour later. I read every page. Judge Hastings wrote, "The evidence presented demonstrates the premeditated exploitation of an elderly person by those in positions of trust. The incident at the restaurant, the attempt to drug someone to facilitate document signing, constitutes a felony in itself. Subsequent surveillance recordings reveal ongoing manipulation and planning. This court finds the defendant's actions reprehensible and deserving of the maximum civil sanctions." Reprehensible. Maximum penalty. Public document. I printed the opinion and filed it. One more document in a case now closed. On August 16th, I closed on the sale of the Coral Gables house. Sold to a young family for $2.75 million. They will never know what happened within those walls. They will fill it with different memories, different lives, different futures. That same day, I bought a downtown apartment. 10th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Ocean views to the horizon. $850,000 cash purchase from the house sale. Modern. Impeccable. No history. I moved in on August 18th. Furniture arrived and was simply placed. Nothing excessive. Nothing unnecessary. The space felt like taking a breath after being underwater. August 20th. Last meeting with Veronica in her Pinewood office. The certification still hung on the wall. "Case closed," she said, handing me a USB drive. All the surveillance recordings, reports, and documentation. Go on the record that I thank you for everything. You made it easy. They were predictable. She stood and extended her hand. Take care. Mr. Sterling. We shook hands. The matter concluded. The professional relationship was over. On August 22nd, I sat on my new balcony, phone in hand. I searched for Elena's contact, my finger hovering over the screen. Delete contact. A confirmation box popped up. I pressed yes. Her name vanished. Julian's followed. Both disappeared from my phone, from my life, from my future. The restraining order legally barred them from communication. Even if they wanted to apologize, reconcile, or explain, the law prevented it. 3 years minimum. Enough time for life to move on without them. I felt nothing. Neither satisfaction nor sadness. Just a serene peace. On August 23rd and 24th, I established new routines. Coffee on the balcony in the morning. Walks by the sea in the afternoon. Reading at night with the sound of the ocean drifting through the open windows. I called old friends I had neglected during the chaos. made lunch plans, reconnected, and rebuilt my social life outside of surveillance and legal battles. On August 25th, the sunset painted the sky in layers, orange blending into purple, then deep blue. I stood on my balcony, coffee cooling in my hand, watching the day turn into night. 6 months since February. Since that restaurant, since Mateo's warning, the glass switch, and everything that followed. I protected my assets through the trust, evicted them from my house, held them accountable with a civil judgment, and put their exploitation on public record. I won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival, like emerging from dark waters and realizing I was still breathing. My daughter had tried to poison me. That truth weighed on me, unchangeable. But I refused to be a victim. I refused to accept the manipulation. I refused to let trust make me vulnerable to destruction. The ocean stretched infinitely, the horizon line crisp and defined. Somewhere in the city behind me, Elena and Julian lived with the consequences. A court debt that would follow them for years. A public record that affected their job applications and background checks. A restraining order that prevented them from spinning their story or seeking reconciliation on their own terms. I didn't hate them. Hate required energy, attention, emotional dedication, all that I had dedicated to documentation, preparation, and legal battles. Now I only had peace. The sun touched the horizon. The colors deepened, and the city lights began to twinkle behind me. My coffee was cold, but I didn't move to refill it. I simply stood there, watching the cycle of nature continue, oblivious to human drama. I built an empire from nothing, sold it for $30 million, protected $25 million through an unshakable trust, lost a daughter, but saved myself. I found justice in the courts, and peace in separation. Some stories end with family reunions, forgiveness, and healing. This one ended with distance, documentation, and the relief of being safe. The sun disappeared behind the ocean, darkness settling around me. I finished my cold coffee, left the cup on the balcony railing, and watched the stars appear. Tomorrow I would call my former partner about that consulting opportunity. Next week, I would have lunch with friends. Eventually, I would date, travel, and fill my days with something other than litigation. But tonight I simply stood here, free, protected, alone, but not lonely. The ocean whispered against the shore below. The city hummed with its infinite rhythm. Life went on, indifferent to individual struggles, offering new days to those who survived old battles. I had survived, and that was enough. If you liked this story, please hit like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box to the left. Thank you for watching.